All right. So, welcome to the Seen and Known with Alicia Jones podcast. I am so excited that today is our very first episode, season one, episode one, and it's titled Healing After Divorce. My podcast, Seen and Known, is a space for healing conversations with a faith filled focus. And we also want to create the opportunity to reveal parts of ourselves that we normally hide. And so I'm really excited to welcome my friend, my bestie for the resty. She's an artist. She works with our local arts council. She's an amazing person. She's a fellow divorcee. They say having divorces are a little chic. They're a little in.
Mm.
2026. And so we are going to talk about healing after divorce. So welcome my good friend Abigail Garcia to the Seen and Known podcast.
Hello,
Yay.
my friend. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited that you're here. And so I first want to talk a little bit about why this episode is so important to me and why it was important for me to start with this episode. If you are just getting to know me, I am a divorced lady. I was divorced in 2024. And so 2 years, January 5th. So 2 years, exactly 2 years. And this episode is so important to me because when I was going through my divorce, and even prior to divorce, when I was married and when I was single, I didn't understand how much divorce was not just an emotional rupture, but it's also a spiritual rupture. If you are a spiritual person, if you're a Christian, it can cause you to have a bit of a faith crisis, okay? Especially if you're like myself and Abigail, where you may have been very involved in ministry or your partner was heavily involved in ministry. For me, there was a lot of silence, there was a lot of shame, there wasn't a lot of people that I could personally talk to or reach out to. And there was a difference between what was being done in public and what people thought in the public eye and what was my private reality. I dealt with so much anxiety. I dealt with panic attacks. I dealt with, of course, some fights with my ex. I dealt with things that just didn't create the most emotionally safe environment for me and for my child at the time. There's a thing about church, or in some circles, we like to call it Christianese, where they have this faith language anytime somebody experiences a crisis like divorce, where it just says, well, we're called to forgive. And they use that as a language to kind of cover up the trauma that people go through just because us as Christians are called to forgive. And I do believe that you can forgive someone and you can have a sense of I don't even want to use the word reconciliation, but a sense of, I would say, forgiveness for that person, just for your own heart and for your own process, healing process. But that does not mean reconciliation in the way that people would like us to believe it means. It doesn't always mean you're going to reconcile and y'all are going to come back together and be a happy family again. Sometimes it means you're going to co-parent and you're going to, go about your life. And lastly, for me, I dealt with a fallout in my own community. So I was married to someone who was a pastor and had been worked in ministry since he was about 19, 18, 19 years old. And so there was a sense of community that had been built on his side and with his friends and with his church community that I came into as once I married him. And so when you are pastor's wife, you are of the assumption that, your friends, our group friends, our family friends, our married friends are both of our friends. They're not just his friends. And then you get
Right.
divorced and you realize that no, they were his friends or no, maybe they related to you as a married couple, but they don't relate to you anymore as a single woman. And so, all of those things, that loss of community, being very much ostracized from the church that my ex and I built, along with dealing with my own feelings of shame, of hurt, of God, I did all of the things right. How could you allow this to happen to me when we were abstinent before we got married and we didn't kiss until the altar and we did all these things that they tell you to do, and we end up walking the path of divorce. And so that is why this particular episode, it was really important for me to just come out swinging and just let you guys know who I am and why we're creating this space of healing for all of the people that we're going to be building in this community, and also share the experience of my good friend Abigail Garcia. And so I hope that that gives you all some greater context into my experience. And now I'm going to give Abigail a bit of time to share a little bit about her story and how she came to this beautiful place of being remarried with her wonderful children and her great husband that I see all the time. And I'm like, yeah, you're so great. We love you so much. So tell us a little bit about it. Right. You're so wonderful. We love you, Josh.
Uh-huh.
So tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I grew up in the church. I usually word it as I was born into the church. Um, I grew up in the church. I met my former spouse in church. And then we served together in church, both in a staff capacity and also just as later on as volunteer capacity, but actively serving in the church. Um, I would say probably 2017, things just slowly started to unravel. And part of that unraveling was my own actually seeking therapy and counseling.
Mhm.
Um, and that really just kind of opened my eyes to some things that were going on. Um, I try to be very careful in what I say in that regard. Because I have older children and I don't want to tell too much of a story that they had ownership of. But all of this culminated in 2019. And so um, I actually entered into that season of separation and then the whole world shut down. Um,
Wow.
yeah. Um,
That's crazy.
right. Right. And then actually, right before the whole world shut down, right after my official separation, is when I met Josh, and we did the long distance thing, getting to know each other while I was actively healing. I hear a lot of people say, like, oh, you can't do this and this and this until you're healed. Healing is not linear, and that journey looks different for a lot of people. I can 100% say that meeting my current partner and living life with him has been a major part of my healing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, right now we got married in November of 2024. We're doing that blended family, figuring life out journey. But yeah, that's where we are right now.
Awesome. That's beautiful. And I joke about Josh, but we we as someone who has watched your journey, we are so happy. All of her friends are just like, we were at her wedding, like in awe of God's goodness, and how he shows up even in the parts that he's not supposed to show up in a divorce. Like he's not supposed to, according to, popular Christian culture. A lot of times people will see divorce and they won't see the beauty that is the redemptive nature of God on the other side, meaning redeeming the time that you spent, the things that you went through, and now you have someone that's able to love you in the way that you deserve to be loved. And so you're able to show your children that this is really what, being loved well looks like. And
Right.
how much you are able to model um, a healthy love for them. And so someone asked me, who someone who was talking about divorce asked me, when did you know? And my situation was a little bit different because it was kind of like I was never even thinking about divorce. And then the next day I knew it was something that I was going to do. So it's a little bit different. It wasn't like a gradual, like, oh, he's not, doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's not paying attention to me. We're falling out of love. It was never like that. It was like, oh, I'm like deeply in love with this person. And like, oh, I found out about infidelity, I found out about lies and deceit, and now I know that I'm getting
Right.
divorced. And so my situation was a little bit different, but she asked me like, when did I know that I was going to get a divorce? And the question I posed myself that I told her about was, I said, I asked myself, if my daughter was to emulate our relationship, would I be happy about that? Or
Yeah.
if my daughter was in a relationship and was in this situation, what would I tell her to do? And when I realized that I would not want my daughter to be cheated on and mistreated and publicly humiliated for years, I would never tell her to stay in that situation. She's worth so much more than that. So I think a lot of
Right.
times the things that we want for our children, we don't necessarily want for ourselves or think we
Or,
deserve.
or think we deserve. Right. Right. Yeah.
So
I would agree with that.
so tell me a little bit about we talked about being married to someone in ministry. The joys.
Mm.
The joys. How does being married to someone in ministry complicate the experience of divorce?
um, I've always felt that there's a different set of rules. You know,
Yeah.
being the wife of the spouse of a pastor, of a pastoral staff member, of a minister, you know, church people, and I use that term, I'm generalizing, but in general, church people like to believe that we're on the same page, that, the same rules apply to everybody. But those of us who have been on that side of things, we've been in those pastoral positions, we know that that is not true. Um,
Right.
we, for better or for worse, we are on a pedestal. There's a different set of rules that apply to us. And, whatever, I feel like sometimes whatever's taught to the church members in general, like, being long suffering and bearing your cross and all of these things, it is exponentially more expectation wise for those of us
Yeah.
who are in pastoral relationships. Um, and so when things get so bad that the average person would consider separation or divorce, it's almost like it has to be that much worse for us to be in that position.
Yes.
We're expected to handle things differently. We're expected to take on more. We're expected to shoulder more. We're expected to put up with more. Um, and then if we get to that place where we're like, look, this is a deal breaker for me. I cannot stay in this kind of environment anymore. It's almost like instantaneously in the minds of people,
Hmm.
God's calling is completely removed from us, like instantaneously. We're like outside
Yeah.
of the will of God. So I think it definitely, being in that position creates so many more barriers in seeking help or in taking care of ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, that is so true. Like, I was thinking about what you were saying. Of course, this is true and it's something we know to be true, but I think it is so much harder when you're in a Christian space. But along with, you basically needing to be beat down and just
Mm.
laying on the side of the road homeless, that's the only way people will think it's okay for you to get a divorce if you are
Right,
in
right.
ministry. But it's even weirder, like, to add a layer of misogyny in it because
Mm.
it's different if you are the woman.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
It's different. Like you can have men that are pastors that will cheat on their wives over and over and over again, and there will be evidence, there will be videos, there will be, and people will still be on that person's side. And it doesn't mean that that person is just thrown away. And I want to say that because I think that when you say that, it's very easy for them, for someone to say, like, oh, well, you want them to just throw the pastor away and like forget him and he doesn't have any grace and stuff. But like at there is a point that not necessarily that the person doesn't receive grace, but that they can realize that, recognize that maybe being in leadership and maybe leading a church, or maybe, having a position of power where they're exposed to lots of women, maybe that's not what's best for them.
Right. Right.
So it's not just about the misogyny, is that a lot of times, and I can say from my experience, I was, when I publicly talked about the infidelity that I had been put through, I was ostracized not because I had did anything wrong, but because people didn't want me to talk about it.
Yeah. It made them uncomfortable. It makes them uncomfortable.
Honestly, and this is the part, okay, this is quiet. I don't think I ever said this publicly. So many of the men were uncomfortable, I think, because they know if it's okay for me to divorce my pastor husband, then it's okay for their wives to divorce them for some of the stuff that they did. And that was the
Yeah.
energy I was feeling,
Yeah.
and so maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm making a leap here, but that is the way that I thought that people in positions of power would have done the pastoral thing, which is like, let me help her. Like clearly she's like going through a lot, and this is like her
Mhm.
entire life was changing. Like let me give her a phone call. Let me have my wife call her. Let like none none
Mhm.
of none of
No.
none of that.
No. They would rather it in those instances, my situation, by the time I made that decision, we had we were no longer serving at the church that we had been on staff at. We were at a different church, but we were still
Mhm.
serving, just in a different capacity. And when I decided to take a step back, my experience was very much like they just wanted me to fade into obscurity. Like
Mhm.
let's not have conversations, let's not check on, and you always feel kind of weird being like nobody checked on me. And I think we feel weird when we say that because we've been in that position of being part of a church and being leadership where people
Yeah.
said that maybe about us when we were like they didn't even check on me. So it feels
Yes.
a little weird to say that, but not having that powy energy is just a fact. No one checked, no one
Yes.
peeked in. And in my position, I know I even like reached out to specific people who were in my life in ministry at that time to just be like, hey, I know you know what's going on. Would love to really have a conversation to sit down. And, I was ghosted. People, I feel like in those situations, it's almost like our actions hold up a mirror and people are
Yes.
forced to look at themselves, to look at their own situations, to look at their own lives. And that makes some people very uncomfortable. And instead of choosing to do that and to meet it head on and to say, okay, let's have these conversations, instead, it's very much a, hey, I'm going to need you to just kind of be quiet and go on about
Right.
your life. Let's not do this.
Yeah. And I even saw that like with people in my family. Um, I think that the way that you view traumatic situations is just a reflection of your lived experience.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you have women, like I had women that were in my life that were really like, listen, you need to figure out a way to make this work. And I was like, we're related. like we're related. Like you should be on my side if there's a side to take.
Yeah.
We're related. So it's not like I'm the person that did harm to my ex and you're trying to counsel me. It's not like that's the case. You are just saying like this is a good guy. And it's like I
Mm-hmm.
understand to a certain degree, because I know what it's like being a single woman and dating. Like, if you got a good one, you hold on to them for dear life. I get it. I get
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
But I think that the generation, my our parents' generation, and even of course the generation before them, they had this mindset that um it's better to be in a relationship than to not.
Yeah.
And I think our generation is the first real generation that, even though it is very hard financially as a single mother, I talk about that all the time. I have the most peaceful home. I don't walk on eggshells.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not anxious all the time. I'm not having panic attacks every other day. I'm not worried about what someone is doing in regards to if that person is dating behind my back. I don't, there's so many things that I just don't worry about. Money is, that's a big thing, but it doesn't, just entrap my mind the way that I would be entrapped if I was with someone that I couldn't trust.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that is a big part of the fallout that we see. And that was going to be my next question, like what does the fallout look like after divorce in the faith communities? Some people, and it's funny because some people are divorcing, you don't even know that they're divorced because they've
Yeah.
been with their
Yeah.
current partner so long. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something I experienced even with my sorority. Like, I think I remember when I first started talking with my chapter members in my sorority, and I was mentioning like about getting divorced and trying to date again. And like my sorors were like, this person was like, oh, yeah, this is my second husband. I'm like, oh, girl, I didn't know you were part of the crew.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
know. And so they were like, it was like people just coming out of the woodworks, like, oh yeah, I got divorced when I was 25. Oh yeah, I got divorced. I was like, oh, in the club we all fam. I didn't know. I didn't know. So tell me about, your experience. Like, what does the fallout look like for you? And I know you talked a little bit about it, but just dive deeper into, what was the actual like practical fallout that you experienced while you're going through your divorce?
Well, for me, I think it was the biggest part was just that loss of identity as a
Yes.
person who very much was not only like just entrenched in the church and church culture, but also like I had served for so long. Like by the time that this happened, I had been a ministry leader for over a decade.
Hmm.
And that was how I identified myself. Like when people asked me like what I did, like I was like, oh, I'm a wife and I have three kids. Oh, and I lead a high school girls ministry for my church. Like I did
Hmm.
that for a decade. That was who I was. And even when we left that position and we started attending a new church for a couple of years before our divorce, I immediately jumped back into ministry. It wasn't student
Yeah.
ministry, but I was actively serving with the media team, and that was just part of who I was. And so
Yeah.
when the divorce took place, it was like a part of myself was amputated. And so,
Yes.
I think about, amputees, how they deal with like phantom pains and
Yes.
constantly like this presence of this missing piece. Like that was the immediate fallout for me. And then you couple that with being ostracized by people who I had actively lived life with
Yes.
every day. And, you know, that I think really hit my own faith because it was like, man, these people know me, and if they know me and they have served me and lived life with me, and they're able to view me in this new light, like I must be doing something wrong.
Yes.
Um, it
Yes.
was like all it's just so confusing. I mean, it took years for me to get to a place of really understanding that um, proximity doesn't always equal intimacy and truly knowing
Mhm.
people. Um, you know, and I think you understand this better than anybody. You can actively serve with people for decades
Yes.
and them not know you. Um, because, especially serving in church culture, the unfortunate truth is that a lot of us are taught to mask
Yeah.
ourselves, our real experiences, so that we're not seen as not being holy enough or not being good
Mhm.
enough in that church setting. And, all of those things culminated into me having a huge faith crisis when I
Yeah.
left, which is just further evidence that, we, a lot of times our faith experience is tied up in the wrong things. Um, so, for me, the immediate fallout was just that loss of self, that loss of identity, which ultimately, like, is where my faith took the biggest hit.
Yeah, and we've talked about this too, like extensively. Just for me, my ex was the pastor of my church, but also my personal pastor. So to me, and this is probably my on the spectrumness. So for the people that are just meeting me for the first time, I'm a little neurospicy, okay? And so in that neurodivergence, if you're not familiar with the term, we're thinking people with ADHD, people with sensory processing disorder, people with autism. And so for me, I have an issue with when things are not direct. Okay. When things are not like clear. If someone says that they are a pastor and says that they're living their life in this way, I don't question it. I don't try to look deeper. I don't try to figure out if they're really living that way. I just assume that this
Face
is
value.
I take things for face value. That is just
Yeah.
that is just how I take it. So for
Mhm.
years we separated in 2022, so it'll be 4 years this year from the separation. I just didn't understand. And my friends were trying to like, girl, that he doesn't respect you. He doesn't value. Like they were like literally trying to yell at me, like, because in my mind, what do you mean? Like,
Mhm.
what do
Mhm.
you mean? And so to your point about having
Yeah.
a faith crisis, of course that's lead to a faith crisis
Mhm.
because now I have a misalignment of what I thought a pastor is supposed to live like, and I understand mistakes. I understand we're all human, but the things that
Right.
were done to me specifically
Mhm.
almost seemed intentional. Like, why are you married to me if you're intentionally trying to harm me?
Right. Yeah.
Like, how is that pastoral? I don't so for
Mhm.
me, that is the part that created the faith crisis as well, because I'm like, God is not good then.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
if he was, I wouldn't be going through this situation. Now, of course, that is a very skewed way of looking at it. But when you're going
Yeah.
through trauma, that is how
Mhm.
that is your view. That is your view
Yeah.
because I did all these things to serve God. I was,
Mhm.
to the point. I mean, my marriage, even before the infidelity, even during the infidelity, it was at the brink because we were serving. We could never go on date nights because we were always like setting up for the church on Saturdays. I would literally beg, just like, we have to do something about setting up on Saturdays. We did that for years, to where
Mhm.
we couldn't go on long trips. We couldn't do anything because the weekend was prime time. The weekend was prime time. And so
Yeah.
it's not to discredit ministers and ministers' wives, but there is a very unique lived experience when you are
Mhm.
in ministry. And
Yeah.
um you cannot connect your belief in God and his
No.
goodness to the happenings of what's going on in your life, or what fallible humans are going to do to you, because they're going to let you down. If I've learned anything
Exactly.
in these past 4 years, your husband, your partner is going to let you down in some way, and they cannot be your God. Marriage cannot be your
Mhm.
God. It cannot be your idol,
Mhm.
because if you lose that, you literally will lose your identity and you'll be like, who am I? And that was the exact same experience I went through with similar as what you just stated. Like, I just was like, I don't know if I believe this anymore. And I literally told one of my mentors that, and he couldn't believe it. But I'm like, he was like, you were on fire for God. You started nonprofits, you started ministry, you've been serving the Lord since you were in college. I'm like, I don't care about all that. I don't care. And so definitely I think there needs to be a space 4 people or more spaces that are experiencing a faith crisis because of church hurt. And people always like to
Mhm.
scoff it off like, oh, it wasn't the church that hurt you, it was people. But it's like, but the systems of the church, though. The
Well, I mean,
systems.
by definition, the church is people. I mean,
Correct. We're talking about Big C Church. That's
right.
what I keep telling people. We're not just talking about uh Greater Missionary Olive Baptist Church here in Salt Second in Monroe.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Big C Church, the church as an institution. What does it do
Hmm.
for women? How does it support women? How does it
Yeah.
help? How has it helped me post divorce, where people wrapping their arms around me and doing meal trains and trying to make and come and clean in my house and try? No, they didn't care. They were like, "Girl, we don't care. When's his next
Yeah.
wife coming in?" Like, like we don't care.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so so we talked about identity a little bit too. On the back end, like, how did you reclaim your identity? Like, how did you figure out who you were and open your heart again to let someone in to love you and to start this journey toward your remarriage and this blended family that you have now?
Well, I think for me, the whole like reclaiming my identity, like I know the word deconstruction is very controversial. Still, people
Mhm.
do not like that word. I personally, that was part of my journey. That was part of me reclaiming myself. And I've said before recently in a blog post that I don't know very many people who go in and tear their house down to the studs and the foundation and then intend to live in it like that. So the purpose of
Right.
deconstruction is not to be homeless and unhoused and left to the elements. You're always going to rebuild something. And so
Yeah.
for me, um, I do talk about the fact that I had to deconstruct my faith. And it wasn't to say that I would end up without a faith. That was never the
Mhm.
intention. It was to understand that I had such an unhealthy, enmeshed kind of relationship with church
Mhm.
and letting church, not God, church identify me and finding my identity in church that I had to strip all of that away.
Yeah.
And part of that was really dissecting what I had been taught, not just, by the church, but by my family,
Mhm.
about faith, about God, about church, stripping all of that away and letting myself sit in that rubble
Yeah.
and then sifting through it and seeing what was salvageable, what out of this mess is worth keeping, should I keep, do I want to keep, and then rebuilding from there. It's still, it's 2026. I just turned 41 and I'm still actively rebuilding that. Um,
Mhm.
but I had to figure out who I was outside of that relationship, outside of the
Yeah.
church institution. Um, who does God say that I am? How do I feel about who God says I am? Like all of these things I didn't know for myself because I was just doing what I had been told or what I had been taught.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, it really meant fully stripping away everything, which is really scary. It's really scary to start pulling things down. It's really scary, to pull things down to the studs and realize, like, oh, we have a foundational issue. Like, this whole
Mhm.
foundation's going to have to come out. And we're going to have to lay a new foundation. But that was necessary. Um, it's scary to choose curiosity over certainty.
Yeah.
I feel like as humans, we do not like to be uncertain. We do not like to not have the answers.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that that's necessary as well. I'm in this season of not having all the answers and being okay with that. I am in
Mhm.
this season of being able to embrace curiosity and wonder and be okay with that.
Yeah.
And for me, and I know for you, like raising children in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of not having all the answers, can also be scary.
Yes,
Um,
for sure.
so for me, that was necessary. it's definitely, that healing process and then starting over and then being willing to open yourself up. Like that was very scary for me. The way that I was raised, I was very homeschooled, very traditional evangelical. And so as a girl, I was raised to believe that my ultimate value would be found in being a wife and a mother.
Yeah.
And, being able to also let go of that part of our identity. Obviously, didn't let go of,
Mhm.
being a mom, but, when you go from being a wife, and that's like the ultimate pinnacle, to being no one's wife, there's also this like dichotomy of wanting to be a wife again and also being like, I'm
Yes.
never getting married again.
Yes.
Um, and when I met Josh, I was not convinced that I ever wanted to, I said I was never going to date. When I met Josh, it was purely coincidental, or at least so I
Mhm.
thought. Um, was never going to get married again. Was not interested in dating again. Um, but I think that that's part of that reclaiming that identity, reclaiming my identity, opened me up to be able to be receptive to, okay, this is what I actually deserve because this is actually who I am. I
Mhm.
deserve to exist in a space where my nervous system can rest. I deserve to live in that experience of being in a relationship with someone who does care for me, who wants good for me, but who
Yes.
also allows me to grow, who understands that, I have to grow because the only things that don't grow are dead things,
Yeah.
and who's willing to grow with me and alongside me. I would not have been able to experience that and allow myself to experience that if I had not ripped all of that down at the beginning. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely. There were so many good things that you said. Excuse me. What's I think what I struggle with, and I'm, that's a part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, is because we're all just healing in real time. I
Right.
think a lot of times when I talk to women, I talk to so many women. Well, since I've started talking about divorce on TikTok, I have had women reach out to me, like people I know, people I didn't know were struggling with these issues, people that I don't know, and I went through the deconstruction process too because I was not sure of if I wanted to be associated with a religion that perpetuated some of the things that I had to heal from.
Right.
Many of the women that, most of the women that were a part of the infidelity that broke apart my marriage were in the church, like to some capacity, either in the church with me or people I knew from church, and so I didn't understand how that religion that had those types of people that I trusted would also be the same religion that would bring some sort of redemptive arc for me, or for my
Right.
family.
Yeah.
It just didn't make sense to me. And so I am not, and I've only recently had to admit this to myself in my not dating, journey. Like I haven't been dating for several months now, and no, looks like it's not going to stop. I have no plans on stopping that. And so, um, I think the deconstruction is definitely a part of that because you don't know what your worth is outside of this role that you're meant to play,
Yeah.
and I didn't even know. I still, to a certain degree, like I didn't even know what my hobbies were. I was
Mm.
so
Right.
exhausted from being a wife and from mothering and newborn. I didn't know what I liked to do anymore. I knew I used to like to dance, and I danced in college and I danced all throughout school, but do I currently like to dance? Like
Right.
what is, who am I as a person? And so the time that I've been spending, and then, well, let me back up. And then there's a little bit of shame
Mm.
because as much as I'm a feminist, like, yes, stick it to the man, stick it to misogyny, I enjoy being a wife.
Yeah.
I enjoyed nurturing my family. I enjoyed
Mhm.
um, being pregnant. I enjoyed birthing my child, even as difficult. Sorry, that was my mailman. I enjoyed birthing my child, even in my difficult birth. I enjoyed those first few moments of her life, and like I want that. I want more children, and when I say that, almost everybody like like pulls back from me when I say, and I've always said, even during my separation and divorce, I've always said like, oh, I want to get married again. I almost have stopped saying it because people are just so like, girl, why? Like,
Yeah.
why? Like, you did that, but and so yeah, so I do have a lot of shame around that because I think people feel like you have to be one or the other. Like you have to either go through divorce and never want divorce again, or you have to be a trad wife. Like I just
Yeah.
I don't think that I think we have more
Mm-mm.
options,
Yeah.
and so I appreciate you sharing about reclaiming your identity. Um so I have one more question. Um
Yeah.
what do you feel like you would say to someone who feels like their divorce might have disqualified them from having God's best? And I'm saying this, let me preface this. Saying this as a person that has heard it all, who has heard no, you can't get remarried unless your partner is dead.
Hmm.
There are people that um and this is the number one turn off. When men who are interested in me automatically like are like, well, could you have stayed in your marriage? Like first off the rip, I'm just meeting you. Like, was it just a little bit of cheating or was it a lot cheating? Like literally have had people like say that. I'm like, I just met you. I just met you.
Yeah.
So
Right. Right.
you're done.
You're done.
You're
Yeah.
done. So I've heard it all. I've heard it all from different
Hmm.
faiths. So there are some people in the faith that believe that if you are divorced, you should not get remarried because it's considered adultery. You should always
Adultery.
try to
Yeah.
reconcile.
Hmm.
I've even, and that's something that I've actually talked to my ex about because we've talked about should if you're divorced, should you be able to pastor? Because it does say like in the Bible, like that. I don't know the exact scripture because I'm not a Bible scholar, but it says something about either leaders or elders or deacons being married to one wife. And
The
some
husband of one
people
wife. Yeah.
believe, yeah, some people believe that if you're remarried, it disqualifies you to be a pastor or elder or a leader or a
Hmm.
deacon at a church. So what do you say to someone who feels that way and that their divorce might have disqualified them from being with the love of their lives?
Um. Whew. So the first thing I think I'll back up because one of the first things that I was told was divorce is a sin. God hates divorce. Divorce is a sin. Um, Here's what I truly believe, and that is that divorce itself is not a sin. God hates divorce, but God hates divorce because of what caused the divorce. The divorce itself is not necessarily a sin. It can be the product of sin. It can be the consequence of a sin. Um, I do not believe that God intends for a person or people to exist in spaces that are toxic and unhealthy.
Mhm.
I believe that is a it can be a form of self abuse if you're subjecting yourself to that treatment. Um, I know like those scriptures that talk about, he should be the husband of one wife. I think, like with anything, context is very, very important.
Mhm.
Um, I tend to err on the side of God was saying that uh, pastors shouldn't be polygamists or have concubines
Yes,
back in the day.
I agree.
Um, so so there's that. I do not. Uh, you look biblically at all of the people, the imperfect men that God used. Um, and I do not think that divorce disqualifies anyone's calling. I think it can reshape someone's calling.
Yeah,
None of us enter into a marriage with the idea that, like, okay, I'm going to give this 10 years and then we're going to get a divorce and we're going to move. That's never the plan.
right, of
you
course.
know you didn't enter into your first marriage with the intent to eventually be a single mom. you
Right.
know
Goodness,
Me
no.
either. No, absolutely, no one would choose that. No one would
Right.
choose that. um so I do not agree with those beliefs that say that divorce disqualifies you. I remember the church that we actually were in when we got married. The pastor would actually preach from the pulpit, and he would say, they might not have been the right one for you before you married them, but when you married them, they became the right one, and you have to do
Yes.
what you have to do to stay. I remember when I first went before a pastoral counselor at that church, and had some conversations about some very hard things that were going on. um, had I said that in like a actual therapist's office, had I told them those things, that would have been an immediate flag on the play.
Hmm.
What I know now is that an actual therapist would have been like, wait, hang on, back up. Can we repeat that? Like, what
Yes.
happened? Whereas the pastoral counselor that we sat in front of that day, who was not a counselor in any official capacity,
Hmm.
looked me dead in the eye and said, well, we all have our crosses to bear.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
sir.
we just sit there with
That's
that for a
also
minute.
why you should
Um,
always go to like licensed
a licensed
counselors.
therapist, correct, correct.
Yes.
Um, Divorce is not a sin. It is the product of a sin. Divorce does not disqualify you. It may align you in a different way. It may change your calling. I believe that callings are very fluid. I
Hmm.
believe that as life happens, as we pivot, our callings can pivot and our callings can change. I don't think
Yeah.
that the fact that I walked through divorce took away my calling. I did think that for a little while when I first got
Hmm.
divorced, because that's what people were telling me. That was the message.
Yeah.
Um, but what I now know in 2026
Hmm.
is that God's calling on my life, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, like that never left me. I felt
Yeah.
like it did, because I was being told that. I was being told that I was no longer called. I was being told that the Holy Spirit had left me, like all of these things, and that's not
Hmm.
true.
Right.
Um, so what I would tell, and I think you and I even had some of these conversations early on
Yes, for sure.
about this does not disqualify you. This does
Mhm.
not take away that calling. God is bigger than all of that. He is bigger than the situations that we find ourselves in. He's bigger than divorce. Um, so no, it doesn't disqualify you.
So good. Yeah, as we're ending our time, I something that you just said made me think about the scripture that talks about all things working together for the good of those who love the Lord and who are called according to his purpose. And one thing that I struggled with was the thought that divorce could be a positive in my story.
Mm,
It was the problem. It has been the problem to be solved
mm,
for years. And I never envisioned it as what I've read about, as some people can call it severe mercy, right?
mm,
But on the other side of it, years on the other side of it, it is something that I have to renew my mind about every single day.
right.
Um, I think, you know, God has been inviting me into a season where I do every single thing with him. And every single decision I make is done with him and the purpose that he has in front of me in mind. And so I think after my divorce, God is just inviting me to just like, okay, do this with me this time. Like,
Right.
and not saying he wasn't in my past relationship. I do believe that he was, and I believe that the work that
Hmm.
we did together was evidence of that.
Hmm.
But I think he also didn't cause its unraveling.
No. Mm-mm.
So now we get an opportunity to do every single walk, every single step with him and to see the fruit of it when you do it with
Right.
him. And so I will say
Yeah.
that I don't think God caused my divorce, but I think that he used it to
Hmm.
develop a more authentic, honest, fruitful relationship with him.
Yeah. I would
And
agree with
so,
that.
and
Absolutely.
so even when we talk about money and we talk about things, being a single mother and all of the issues that
Hmm.
come with that, I
Hmm.
depend on God for my daily bread. I depend on him
Right.
to have enough money to feed my family today. And if I don't
Right.
have enough by the end of the day, I'm gonna figure it out tomorrow. And that
Right.
dependence on him
Yeah.
has been birthed from that situation.
Yeah.
And that is good. No
Hmm.
matter any way you slice it,
Hmm.
that is a good thing. And so
Yeah.
I appreciate your story, you sharing your story. I feel like I know all of this, but then you say it, I feel
Yeah.
like it's so rich to our listeners. I'm so honored that you are my very first season one, episode one of Seeing and Known with Alicia Jones. And I'm excited about what's to come. And so, for my listeners, I want you to think about your own story. Think about what parts of your story that you have felt pressure to hide, or where you may have confused endurance in a situation with obedience to God. And I want you to recognize that no matter if we're talking about, platonic relationships, friendships, a marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend relationships, you deserve to be seen and known. You deserve to be seen for who you are, to be known and to be loved, appreciated, cherished for in the way that you deserve to be. And so in a loving, whole way. And so I hope that this podcast will help you. I hope that y'all enjoyed this episode and we will see you guys next time.